Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of 1+1, your place for inconvenient truth-telling and myth-busting. On the program, it's another of our All Things Canada edition, and I'm joined by three guests, a panel of Canadian truth-tellers and myth-busters and anti-imperialist campaigners. So coming to us from Ontario, we have our regular champion, Ken Stone of the Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War, which is a brilliant leftist anti-imperialist organization. We are also joined by Pierre Jasmin, coming to us from Quebec, and he's a leading member of Artists for Peace, or Artistes pour Paix. That's my, sorry about that. That's my awful French accent right there. Coming to us from Quebec, and we're also joined by Janine Solanki, coming to us from British Colombia, who is part of the peace and anti-imperialist organization Mobilization against war and occupation, and all three together are part of the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network. So let's get into the topics at hand because we don't have too much time with our esteemed guests. So firstly, lady and gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you very much.
It's a real honor.
Thank you to be here.
Yes, it's a real honor to speak to you also. So first question to all of you is the following. And we'll start with Ken, followed by Janine and Pierre. So Ken, you were kind enough to forward me this this email, and Pierre, I read the English translation of a press release that all of your organizations sent, which is the following. So the Trump administration, as ghastly as they are, as erratic and irrational their behavior is, and their agenda is one all people who believe in peace and justice and common decency should be mobilized against. But on the one issue, the one topic I do agree with the administration on, which is détente with the government of the Russian Federation and ending the ridiculous cluster F of a situation that is the war in Ukraine. However, with the US trying to bring peace with Russia and even having Saudi Arabia and other non-European states mediate talks, I find the attitudes of Britain and the EU NATO members quite baffling. So the UK, France, and Germany want to continue the war in Ukraine. I'm not sure about New Zealand, and Australia, but Canada also wants to continue the war in Ukraine until Russia is defeated, whatever that means, and it's pushed all the way back to its borders. And there is now talk and flirting with the idea of peacekeeping troops in Ukraine. And the EU and the European members of NATO keep talking about building a European army, which is essentially NATO without the US. And during the Liberal Party leadership race, all candidates, but especially Chrystia Freeland, the once mighty Deputy Prime Minister, Foreign Minister, and even Economic Minister, talked about Canada having closer ties with Britain, a Five Eyes alliance without the U.S., and talked about how supportive she was of helping the EU and European members of NATO build an independent European army with a formal alliance with Canada in response to the possibility that the U.S. Cuts and runs out of Ukraine. Now, in your email press release, you all condemned the proposal of Canadian peacekeeping troops in Ukraine. So please explain why the opposition, because I know all of you are opposed to Western imperialism in Ukraine and you want de-escalation of the conflict and end to hostilities in Ukraine, but why the opposition to a Canadian peacekeeping force in Ukraine? Let's start with you, Ken, followed by Janine and Pierre.
Thank you very much, Youri. I think we are all opposed to the idea of a Canadian participation in what they call a reassurance force for Ukraine, which our new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, spoke about a week or so ago. On his very first day in office, he attended a virtual call with the Brits, the French, the Germans, and many other countries in Europe and some countries outside of Europe who call themselves a coalition of the willing. And for your younger listeners and viewers, Youri, a coalition of the willing is a reference to the group of countries back in 2003 that decided they would go against the ruling by the United Nations Security Council that it would not support a US UK invasion and occupation of Iraq, but they would go ahead and do it anyway. And that's what the US and UK did in 2003. They launched an illegal war against Iraq, and they occupied the country, and they're still occupying the country until today. And they've privatized the oil, and they have destroyed the country, and they've been told to leave several times, and they won't leave. So this is what a coalition of the willing looks like. And that's exactly what they call themselves, and exactly what Prime Minister Mark Carney, on his very first day in office, participated in. When he got off the call, he let Canadians know that there would be, as a result, an unprecedented rise in military spending in Canada. And this mirrors what the so-called coalition of the willing in Europe talked about, because when they got off the call, they called for an 800 million euro increase in military spending in Europe, which translates to 1.2 trillion Canadian dollars. That's a lot of money. And what they were planning is to take over. They're taking over the franchise. In my view, they're taking over the franchise for Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, rather than saying that oh, look, the US wants out, so we should follow suit. We should stop funding the Zelensky regime in Ukraine. We should stop sending them arms. We should make a peace with Russia. We should restore and normalize diplomatic relations with Russia. Get the killing over with. But that's not what they decided. They decided they wouldn't like to continue the war. And so what our Prime Minister has done is he has put us on a path of conflict with Russia, and he's calling it peacekeeping. But in my view, and I'm guessing in the view of my comrades on this call, this is not peacekeeping. This is war making. Canada did have a role in peacekeeping in the past in the United Nations. In fact, it was Lester B. Pearson who got the Nobel Prize for creating the peacekeeping force for the United Nations. And I'm sorry to say that not every peacekeeping operation that Canada participated in was actually peacekeeping. Sometimes it was to shore up the US empire. Though there were a few peacekeeping efforts were genuine, like UNIFIL in Lebanon, which was there to keep the Israelis away from Lebanon. So, but this is not peacekeeping, what they're talking about in Ukraine. It's war making. And I'll let the other two comrades have their say now.
Janine, Janine, your response followed by Pierre.
Sure, thank you. And thank you, Ken, for making my job easier talking a little bit about what's happening right now, because I want to step back a little bit and, we might agree on a lot of things, disagree on some things. I really think that this myth of peacekeepers has really always been on the government of Canada's terms. However, it's sold to us has always been what's in the interests of imperialists in Canada and the US also. But I want to just remind everyone of a quote from General Rick Hillier of the Canadian Forces from when Canada was in Afghanistan in 2005. And at the time, I was, as an anti-war activist and organizer with my group here in Vancouver with Mobilization Against War and Occupation, we'd go out and we'd petition people against Canada being in Afghanistan. And we'd have all these people say, no, Canada's a peacekeeper there. And then General Rick Hillier made our job a lot easier by saying, quote, these are detestable murderers and scumbags, end quote, of the people in Afghanistan, and said, we are the Canadian forces, and our job is to be able to kill people. And I think that really helped people understand what Canada was doing in Afghanistan, which is very related to Canada's role in NATO, because Canada was in charge of the occupation forces in Afghanistan multiple times throughout that many year long war and occupation over 2 decades. And part of that was a division of labor between all of these imperialist countries. And that's what I think NATO is really for. You know, this expanding and deepening capitalist financial and market crisis that the world is facing is being addressed by the United States government and their allies, including Canada, by expanding wars and occupations. And this is beyond the ability of the United States to just carry out by themselves. They need to divide all of this up between their imperialist allies, including Canada. So that was, of course, Afghanistan, where Canada was in charge of what they called the peacekeeping force, and then they eventually dropped that label. And now we're potentially seeing that again in Ukraine. And we know that any move that Canada and the United States is taking to be involved in any way is going to be on their terms and for their benefit, not for the benefit of anyone in that region, whether Russian or Ukrainian whatsoever. So that's why a big campaign of the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network is for Canada out of NATO and for an end to NATO and dismantling of NATO overall.
And anything else you want to add, Pierre?
Yes, my friend Ken reminded me of these days of the beginning of the Iraq War, when Jean Chrétien, whom I met several times as president of Artists for Peace, decided, because our streets in Montreal were full of 250,000 demonstrators to oppose the war. And then he was sort of forced of accepting that Canada should not join US and UK murderers who went against the wish by the United Nations and by Hans Blix, who was the Swedish envoy who discovered that Saddam Hussein did not have any weapons of mass destruction as US pretended. And so this is the usual warring people. And I like very much also Janine remembering the exact words of the Canadian general that was installed by Harper to replace de Chastelain, who was a general who believed in peace and who went to Ireland and he spent less than $1 million to make peace between the Catholics and the Protestants, and by destroying weapons cache from each group. And this is the kind of peace that Canada should work at, and not the horrible pretension that F-35, which are electronically controlled by the US, can do anything for peace. No, they will only do more mass murders, like what happened in Libya also in 2011, when a general of French-Canadian origin, Bouchard, bombed the whole country and assassinated Gaddafi. And you know that each year now we have thousands of migrants, people who are getting drowned in the Mediterranean Sea. And this is all the results of these wars. So we must work for peace.
Exactly. And actually, just a reminder, Canada technically did engage in peacekeeping in Iraq, because even though they were formerly not part of the coalition of the willing. Ketan and the governments afterwards actually secretly were involved in the Iraq War. So
you're right.
did peacekeeping action? So did Canadian peacekeeping actually work to keep the peace in Iraq? Well, I think the results speak for themselves. And actually, just before I get to my second question, Ken, you wanted to bring up something. In opinion polls. So, do you want to talk about that? And maybe I can try to share it with our audience.
Yes, please. I would like to talk about the fact that Angus Reid conveniently conducted a public opinion poll shortly after the Prime Minister, the new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, talked about a coalition of the willing and a reassurance force for Ukraine, about how Canadians would feel about Canada sending troops into a peacekeeping force for Ukraine. And shockingly, well, maybe it shouldn't be so shocking, but 60% of Canadians would support such a force, and only 30% would oppose a force. So clearly, what Mark Carney is counting on is he's counting on labeling this coalition of the willing and the reassurance force for Ukraine, labeling it as a peacekeeping force in order to try and sell it to Canadians. Now, I said that 30%, unfortunately, only 30% oppose this this notion of a full peacekeeping force, because it's actually a war-making force and not a peacekeeping force. But I have to point out as well that starting in 2022, when the Russians launched what they call their special military operation, the opposition in Canada to participating in it and aiding the Zelensky government was only about 10 or 12%. After the first year, it was about 20%. After I can't remember if it was the second or third year, it was 25%. So now, after 3 years, 30% of Canadians are opposed to this war. And that's probably a good thing. And it's the natural progression of when we have wars in which Canada participates through NATO and other US organizations. The support for the war is really high at the beginning. And as it goes, the longer the war goes, the support goes down and down and down as people realize what are the implications of this war on me and my family and the whole country. So I think that the peace movement has its job cut out for it. If Carney actually goes ahead and sends Canadian troops, it will be an uphill battle in this country to convince Canadians that this is not a peacekeeping force, but a war-making force. And that's, I think, why I wanted to bring up the poll.
Very interesting. I'll make sure to link to that. Actually, and just before I get to my second question, I find it interesting that it's the Conservative Party of Canada, which it was under Stephen Harper that actually supported the NATO EU-led coup in Ukraine, which led to the cluster, the terrible catastrophe that we still see unfolding in Ukraine. And so I find it interesting that the Conservative Party is actually the least pro-war on this particular topic compared to the Liberals, the NDP, and and even
Greens.
Exactly. And maybe that's the Conservative Party responding to the Libertarian faction, which tends to be more NATO skeptic, certainly when it comes to Ukraine. So I find that quite interesting, and that's actually a perfect segue to this question, which I wanted Janine's response to. So Janine, in a statement in the press release which you were part of, you said the following. You said the following. NATO has left a trail of death and destruction from its military interventions in the former Yugoslavia, Afghanistan, Libya, and now Ukraine, all with the participation of Canada's military. Canada's bloody warmongering is set to increase as Canada's military spending has skyrocketed in recent years, with the 2024 budget increasing annual military spending to $50 billion by 2030. This is set to increase to at least $82 billion as Mark Carney has committed to spending 2% of GDP, NATO's target, if elected. Funds that should be spent on social needs at home, not wars, occupation, and military intervention abroad. Now, Janine, Mark Carney made it very clear in the two Liberal Party leadership debates, which he won a huge victory. It was almost no contest with the other three, notably Chrystia Freeland. Carney praised the budget of Paul Martin when he was economic finance minister under Jean Chrétien, when the Liberals won a huge majority in the 90s, which was chapter 2 of Canada's neoliberal and endless austerity period. Paul Martin later succeeded Chrétien as prime minister, where he was a big fan of peacekeeping in Haiti and sending troops and escalating Canadian NATO troops in Afghanistan and helping train troops and mobilize NATO in Eastern Europe, where NATO membership grew, as well as continuing Canada's secret involvement in Iraq. So, Janine, can you talk a bit more about the destruction Canada was complicit in when you mentioned Yugoslavia, Afghanistan, Libya, and Ukraine? And then my only follow-up question is, give us a vivid description of what spending 2% of Canada's gross domestic product on militarism NATO is, as well as what even 3 to 5% means, because many corporate media outlets, even politicians, have been flirting with this idea that we got to beef it up to 3 or even 5% GDP, and if not on NATO, certainly on this reactionary idea of a collective European army. So I'm curious your response to that.
Yeah, so I think that's a good question, and something, as Ken was saying, we have a big job ahead of us to continue to convince people that this so-called peacekeeping force is a very bad idea for everyone involved, for people in Canada whose tax-paying dollars are going to be going to war and occupation, and to those that, of course, are going to be on the receiving end of Canada's military forces. So I think that going back to that history, reminding people what peacekeeping forces and what Canada's role as a military power, and I think you referred a little bit to that paper that came out many years ago about Canada breaking out of its middle power status and becoming a military force. Yeah, the Canada First paper, I believe that was maybe 2005 or 2006. And this is really the path that Canada is continuing on, because if Canada is spending and increasing its military budget so drastically, increasing the purchase of warplanes like the F-35 fighter jets, or other warplanes, if Mark Carney decides to, he's not saying I'm just going to not buy these warplanes. It would be replaced with other warplanes. Also a huge investment into the Navy, into warships, into drones, which are also coming from Israel, which we know what they are using those drones on, as they claim that their drones are battle tested. And of course, we know that is against our Palestinian brothers and sisters right now in Gaza and in West Bank. So this huge increase of the military budget, from 2024 going to increasing by 100% up to 50 billion by 2030, that is set to increase. If Mark Carney is saying that he wants to meet the 2% GDP target of NATO, the estimate is increasing that annual budget to at least $82 billion. Of course, money that's needed here at home on social needs, on healthcare, on housing, which is a huge crisis. I mean, here in Vancouver, where I am, where are many other places across the country, in Toronto. And then, of course, that is something I think we need to remind people of, as this money, our tax-paying dollars, are getting spent on war and occupation, are getting spent on killing people, that this is money that could go towards, really urgent human needs as economic crisis and cost of living crisis is increasing in Canada. So I think that's important to remind also people of how Canada was part of the vicious bombing campaign in Yugoslavia, and how destructive that was. That Canada was not a peacekeeper in Afghanistan. That this 20-year occupation set that back the clock for development in Afghanistan. It increased, I remember, because I was just getting involved, and as a young woman, interested in feminist issues, interested in equality, I was being told that Canada is helping women and children in Afghanistan. And then I was seeing the real effects of a dramatic increase of self-immolation in Afghanistan, as women were facing not only their own social issues, but the occupation by Canada and the United States and other NATO countries. To, of course, Libya, where, as Pierre talked about, was subjected to a brutal, what was sold as a no-fly zone, which really meant, warplanes from Canada, the United States, other NATO countries, turning that country from a country that had the highest living standard in all of Africa, that was part of spearheading a campaign, an investment for Africa to have their own satellite communications, whereas previously their former colonial powers were making telecommunications very, very expensive for people in Africa, holding the continent of Africa back. Libya was the one that spearheaded and organized with other countries in Africa to have their own satellite communications and increased telecommunications affordability and progress throughout Africa. And now we see, as Pierre was saying, this huge chaos within Libya, the clock set back for development, and a huge refugee crisis, as people are dying trying to survive and cross the sea there. So I think that all of these things are important for us as anti-war activists and us in the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network, to remind people of that this is a bloody history that Canada has, and that there's no reason to increase a military budget, to buy more warplanes and warships unless you're planning to use them. And I think what we're seeing has been a new era of war and occupation in the last 20 years, from the invasion and occupation of Afghanistan to Iraq to Libya, Yemen, Syria. The list goes on, and that is set to continue, and we have to really be ready for that as anti-war activists.
Yeah, and I also think it's also important to add that that if NATO is this wonderful force in the world that advances democracy and stuff like that, it's always interesting how Yugoslavia, Afghanistan, Libya, and even this false notion of peacekeeping, like what Canada did with Haiti and what Canada secretly did with Iraq, all of those countries have been destroyed, have been engulfed in endless chaos and so forth. So I think we need to also stress that Canada, that even with its noble intentions, all of those places that Canada is involved in are all, have all been engulfed in in chaos. And this leads me to this question. So Pierre, you're based in Quebec, which is a country within a country when one talks about Canada. And I'm curious, in the Quebec corporate media and state media in Quebec, all of which are, of course, in French, are there more debates about NATO, any voices of reasons that push back against the propaganda on NATO, and even reports on the true costs of what military spending at the expense of social programs in Quebec is doing, as well as the horrific costs of war from the type of destruction Janine was talking about, as well as the austerity that comes with these endless counterproductive and anti-ecological wars. I'm very curious your response on that. Oh, you're muted. You're muted.
In Quebec, you know, there's a great reaction against the pipelines projected by Poilievre. Yes. And by Carney, for example. So this resistance is still very strong, and because of also the damage that these pipelines would create against our rivers and against our First Nations, who have protested the most against these military projects, because the pipeline is only a military project to try to deliver gas to Europe so that they won't be, they will be able to resist to America. It's completely crazy.
I didn't know that. That's
very recent. It's very recent because of Trump's upheaval of everything that we believed in before, but also, well, in the art world, because of course, being a Secretary General of Les Artistes pour la Paix, for example, I went to the Festival International des Films d'Art 2 weeks ago, where they presented the hit film of the festival, which is called Soundtrack to a Coup d'État. And yes. Which you might have heard of because it happened in Congo in 1961 when the CIA murdered Lumumba, who was the elect president of, and one knows since what happened to Congo, and especially to the Kivu region, where the Rwanda, with the help of United States, are taking away the resources, the coltan and other that are needed for ourselves, and they are murdering millions of people, and millions of people, I'm not exaggerating like Trump does usually in his press conferences. If you count the number of people that were assassinated in Congo because of our benefit as North America, in 60 years, it's an awful number, and the film was really terribly moving, and I went to see it with my friend Yakov Rabkin, who was born in Leningrad and who wrote the most sensitive and the most exact reporting about what's happening right now about Russia. And he's being published. He's an emeritus professor in Université de Montréal, and he just shows how completely propaganda-like is the situation of trying to make a war go on in a country which lost 100,000 young people being killed in a war that was just a war for weakening Russia. And so that we have people like this, but we are not successful yet to break the threshold of the main, as your question was about the mainstream media. And the propaganda is still erecting a wall to preventing us from bringing these truths to the everyday people. Yeah,
that's fascinating. And then I actually have a follow-up question for that, Pierre, which is, where does the Bloc Québécois, which has members in Parliament federally at the moment, where does the Parti Québécois, the coalition Avenir de Québec, which rules Quebec provincially, its leader is François Legault, the the premier, the governor of Quebec. Where does Quebec Solidaire, which has members in the Quebec National Assembly, and the NDP in Quebec and the Green Party of Quebec, where do all of them stand regarding as far as official leadership and party outline stands when it comes to Canadian membership in NATO? Is there an anti-war, anti-imperialist faction in each of those parties? And a follow-up question of that is, do most Quebec nationalists, those who believe in independence, which is quite a broad church and big tent, if you will, are they more anti-NATO, or it's a mixed bag and there's constant debate and division amongst Quebecers, especially left-leaning Quebecers, about NATO and whether hypothetically an independent Quebec should be a member of NATO or simply a neutral non-membership? I'm curious your response, as Quebec is a unique province in Canada for obvious reasons, and it seems as if most of the Quebec corporate state media and politicians from all parties that they seem to be very hostile towards China and even supportive of the idea of a pivot to Asia, or is it more of a mixed bag in which you have some who want peaceful coexistence with China and others who believe in containing China's rise? I'm curious your response.
These are many questions and all relevant. About China, let's point out that Marie, what was her name? Madame Hogg, who was the head of the special group to what was it called already?
Investigating Chinese interference in Canada's elections.
It was studying interference at all, and Madame Hogg just concluded that these were hoaxes by journalists, and so that proved a lot of independence from her. And we immediately wrote an article, and we wrote to her saying, thank you for being independent and not pressured by the media, who want always, every day, the media come with some racontard, how do you say that in English, about Chinese influence, and there's this Chinese MP who is asked to resign, and so on and so on and so on. So that's one point. The other point is why, as you know, the François Legault is a conservative person. He was just 3 days in Germany in order to sell Quebec weapons to Germany, and so that's horrible. That was his aim, as he said, that we must do something for this great war which will now happen, and so this is terrible because he didn't used to be that way. So he's being brainwashed like many others. As for the other parties, they are confused, and some militants of those parties are, of course, completely on our side. And but I've tried to reach so many times Mr. Boulris, who is the only NDP member in Quebec, but he doesn't want to get involved in deciding whether NATO is good or bad. And so they are all sort of being wishy-washy at the worst, at the least, about this subject. And but we're trying to speak more. And so I think Quebec Solidaire is more on our side than Parti Québécois, who is more who thinks that they can build an independence by flirting with USA, and this is, to my mind, a complete stupid belief. Because if Trump would do something, is to just get hold of electricity and water from Quebec. If Quebec wanted to become fully independent.
I'm also, I don't know this for a fact, but I'm pretty certain if Quebec was to even form an alliance as an independent country with the, with the U.S., or even be the 51st state without the rest of Canada. First law that President Trump would pass is you guys all have to speak English now. So,
well, that's what happened yesterday when Trump even spoke about Law 96, saying that this language law in Quebec, this is something that prevents commercial links. I mean, it's amazing that the President of the United States would signal a Quebec law about language being protected, and it's a good law for that. And so what you saw that Carney was just making a balancing act about that law, because it's a law also that sort of wants to make Quebec more laïque. What's the word in English for that? There's no word actually for
more anglophone. More anglophone.
No, more against, not against, but sort of making sure that religions won't make schools like there was this
the secular law
instant in first school where some Muslims teachers just made the whole school make prayers for Allah, and also they prevented girls from playing soccer because girls should not do sports, or this kind of horrible decision. So no, it's interesting to see how all these elements are playing, and we are making certain that we are playing a role. You know that you've heard of Jeannette Bertrand, who just turned 100 years old, and she was one of our Artists for Peace of the Year 20 years ago. And so that all these women movements in Quebec are making sure, like Janine said also, that in Canada that's the same. The women groups are making sure that war is not the first aim in our lives, but on the contrary, to be more free and to be more pacific and to be more also obeying the United Nations goals. And this is the main thing that Les Artistes pour la Paix want to stress. There's NATO, but much more important, much higher is the United Nations, who are building a world with 190 nations, and this is democratic, and NATO is not democratic.
Exactly, yeah. And actually, also important to note. Ken just sent me this, and it's actually very good. You know, in order to clarify the different parties in Quebec. Alex Tyrell of the Green Party of Quebec is solidly for peace in Ukraine, and he's been involved in many in organizing the counter summit versus NATO last November. He also was a very good friend to a very good friend to the show, Eve Engler. Alex Tyrell actually was literally fighting Eve's corner when he was wrongly imprisoned for 5 days. For speaking out against Israel and for calling out this Zionist influencer. I prefer to call her a waste of space, Dahlia Kurtz. And Alex actually was fighting Eve's corner. So that's also very important to know that there are some.
Yeah, he was with us on the 24th of November with Janine, and we were all, and Ken, we were all in Montreal protesting against NATO being there. And we had this phone call also from Glenn Michalchuk from Winnipeg, who's head of Ukrainians group in Canada. And so it's all making sense against the nonsense that's being proclaimed by the governments, by the conservatives, and so on.
So this is my second to last question. So, which is the following. So, Ken, you respond first, followed by Janine, and then Pierre. And so my second to last question is this, which is, how are the efforts of all of your organizations and fellow comrades and like-minded organizations in trying to make imperialism, Canada's role as a Slavish vassal to the evil Anglo-American empire, Canada's foreign policy, which is advancing abusive corporate power anywhere and everywhere. How are the efforts in making that an important hot topic, along with climate change, the plight of Indigenous people, and trying to build a better today and tomorrow, and addressing socioeconomic issues like the rising cost of living, stagnant wages, the ongoing gap between the super rich and the struggling precarious middle class and the working class poor. And Eve Engler, when I first interviewed him when I first interviewed him, actually on behalf of Black Agenda Reports, before we started the recording, he told me that foreign policy is the worst topic the Canadian corporate and state media covers. It's the worst topic addressed or barely addressed in prime ministers' debates, and it's the topic that gets criminally overlooked the most, and yet it's so essential and related to all the other topics I mentioned, like cost of living, the plight of the working class, the plight of Indigenous people, and the lack of distinction between all of the major parties, etc. Colonialism and imperialism that is always evil, and consistently when it comes to liberals and Tories that are in power, and even the NDP, at least provincially. So, with the ongoing Holocaust in historic Palestine, of which Canada is grossly complicit in, and we still are seeing ongoing weekly large demonstrations, mostly in Montreal against this. All this to stop the spending of military and getting fighter jets, building up the Canadian military in the Arctic, and being told to be afraid of Russia and China. Will this be the year where war and trying to advance peace will be a major topic in this current federal election prime minister's race? Ken, I'm curious your response, followed by Janine and Pierre.
Okay, good question. The answer for me is I hope so. And I'm finding that in the context of Trump's threats to tariff Canada, which he's already done, and his threats to annex our country, a lot of things that were off the table before, or as you said, referring to Eve Engler about foreign policy being the least popular subject, are suddenly on the table. For example, Canada's purchase of the F-35 jets. Now even the Prime Minister is saying he's thinking about suspending that purchase. And other people are now saying, well, and lots of people, and I talk to people all the time, when I'm out knocking on doors for candidates or whenever I'm doing anything, and I find that people are saying, yeah, you know what, I don't understand why Canada should be in NATO if NATO, which is the US military alliance, might be used against Canada or in some form to take over our country. And why should we be putting $40 billion into NORAD, the North Atlantic, not the North Atlantic, I keep getting this wrong, the North American Air Defense Command.
Yeah.
And that's run by a US general who could launch a war on Russia without even consulting the Canadian government. That's how it's set up. So why people are asking, why are we part of these things if Trump is trying to take over our country? Why do we need why are we buying destroyers from them, drones, and all kinds of other equipment? So I'm glad that people are starting to think in this manner, because these were previously, somewhat taboo subjects.
Exactly.
And now ordinary Canadians are talking about them. Our role in all this is to encourage Canadians to talk about them. And that's why, besides issuing the media advisory, which you're responding to with this interview, we also issued a bilingual list of questions for candidates. And hopefully that'll be up on our website shortly at the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network. So it's a list of questions for people to take with them if they go to all candidates' meetings or keep by the door in case candidates knock on the door. And it's to ask them these kind of questions. What's your view on why we should stay in NATO? How come we haven't had a green paper in Canada for several decades discussing, inviting Canadians to participate in discussions about what kind of foreign policy we should have? In our view, in the network's view, Canada's foreign policy should be an independent foreign policy, one that gets us out of NATO and is a peaceful foreign policy, and one that seeks to cooperate with all the countries of the world, including Russia, China, and Iran, on issues of environmental mitigation, on issues of peace, and on issues concerning the continuing health crisis that the whole world seems to be in right now. So those are the kinds of things that our network is doing to try and get Canadians thinking outside the box.
Janine, your response.
Thank you, and thank you again, Ken, for making my response easier by covering so many important points there. I think, as Ken said, really our job as the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network and within all of our individual organizations, because the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network, maybe I should just briefly say, we're a network across Canada of over 50 groups: peace, climate justice, anti-war, social justice organizations that started around the same time as COVID. And we all, of course, we're on platforms like this, suddenly on Zoom instead of in meeting rooms. And then across Canada, we're coming together to talk about how we can organize and how we can unite all of our efforts from groups big and small throughout the country. So we've really grown in the last, I guess, 5 years. And we had our first in-person event as the network, not just, individual groups coordinating, say, a day of action, which we do also. But we had our first in-person counter summit to the NATO Parliamentary Assembly that was held in Montreal last November. And we're going to continue these kinds of actions. We're going to continue bringing people together, and we're going to continue talking and bringing all of these different points together, because as Ken said, and as you were introduced, really we're at a turning point where people are starting to put the dots together. That we're fighting both a war at home and a war abroad. The weapons that are being spent or being sent and being used in, for example, the genocide in Gaza. Many of those weapons are provided by Canada, made in Canada. And Canada also, I think, as we challenge that idea of people in Canada, that Canada is a peaceful country, Canada is a top weapons manufacturer. Even before the current genocide in Gaza, just in 2022, Canada exported about $21 million worth of military-related products to Israel. And then, of course, in about the first year of the genocide, $28.5 million, and continues to send military products to Israel through loopholes, although they try and say that they're not. The United Nations Human Rights Council twice named Canada as one of the states fueling the previous war on Yemen that was conducted by Saudi Arabia, backed by the United States and Canada, because of those arms sales to Saudi Arabia. So these are all dots that we need to bring together. That, what is Canada doing abroad? How is it fueling? While here at home, we're facing the cost of living crisis. We're facing, especially for younger people that are looking at the world around them and seeing the very real effects of climate change, that the government of Canada, maybe the dots that we need to bring together, and one of the organizers within the network, Tamara Lawrence, does a great job of bringing this together, that military and climate change are very much linked. Canada's Department of National Defense accounts for over 60% of federal government emissions that are contributing to climate change. These F-35 jets burn over 5,600 liters of fuel compared to in 1 hour, which is, if you compare it to what a car consumes, is 1,800 liters of gas per year. So these are all things that we need to, I think, help people connect the dots to understand that we're fighting both a war at home and war abroad. We need to be thinking of how people, how important it is to be politically involved and engaged and part of protest movements, because it really is not only about, you know, things happening on the other side of the world that fortunately people are becoming more aware of. I mean, it's been incredible to see how people have joined the movement for Palestine. People who maybe didn't even know anything about Palestine, but have been compelled to get involved and to become active. And just finally, what I want to say is that this also comes down to defending our rights and defending our freedom of expression, our democratic rights. We've seen that with Eve Engler's case. We've seen that with many other cases in Canada and the US and other imperialist countries, that we need to organize to defend our rights. And we can't take them for granted. They have been hard fought for, and we need to keep fighting for them. And to do that, we need to come together. I think that's the beautiful thing about the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network, is that we are many different organizations that come together on a united front. We have many different disagreements, but we work together on the things that we can agree on, from, you know, Palestine to climate justice to fighting against Canada's involvement in NATO. And I encourage people to go to the website peaceandjusticenetwork.ca. That's peaceandjusticenetwork.ca. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, which is at Canada Peace Justice. See what local organizations. I'm myself part of Mobilization Against War and Occupation here in Vancouver, but there's many different organizations all throughout Canada that people can get involved in.
Yeah, your response. Oh, and you're on mute right now.
Yes, it's tough act to follow, Janine.
Well, I don't know because I have to congratulate. I believe Montreal has finally beaten the record of longest consistent anti-war demonstrations, specifically when it comes to Palestine. But I've been seeing lots of Syrian flags, lots of Congolese flags, and Haitian flags at some of those demonstrations. So.
And if someone is, I'll just say, if someone in Vancouver, we look to Montreal and see how consistent Montreal is, and we really, you know, salute Montreal for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, Youri. Also, I don't want to sound too flattering, but the whole array of questions that you've asked reveals a lot of, I mean, a complete comprehension of the international situation, and I'm very honored to be a guest this afternoon.
Thank you.
There's a lot to say. For example, okay, I'm a retired university professor, and I have good links with professors of Université du Québec à Montréal, who, you know, was the only university where we treated the Palestinian rebels with respect. And finally, the administration board of the university voted for a lot of positive laws, for example, accepting more Palestinian students, and also trying to make Israel more aware of how wrong their actions are when they started the genocide in Gaza. So this is not something that goes very much in the newspapers, but there are links between universities, University of Sherbrooke as well, and so that makes sure that the progress that we want for peace is going along. And So we'll have good news, I think, to share with you later on.
That's good. And Ken, you just before we get to the questionnaire, you wanted to do a little plug.
Yes, I wanted people to know that the network is organizing a webinar on Tuesday, April 22nd at 7 p.m. Eastern Time with Eve Engler and other speakers. And this webinar is in solidarity with Eve, who was unjustly arrested, incarcerated for 5 days, and finally released on bail. This webinar is to take place just 3 days before his next court date in Montreal. And so I'm very pleased to announce that we are going ahead with that. And it's his case, as you pointed out, is part of the repression and censorship that's taking place now in Canada against, people who are accused of foreign interference, and also people who are speaking up against Canada's role in the genocide in Gaza and the West Bank. So this is a very high-profile case, but it's only one case of repression and censorship, or attempted censorship, in Canada. We encourage everybody to mark their calendars and attend the webinar, which will be free to anyone who comes.
Here's hoping cooler heads prevail when it comes to Eve Engler's case. We got very lucky. We got very lucky when our comrades managed to get Eve out of, managed to get Eve's bail out. But that was the battle. The real war is, will he be allowed to? Will any of us be allowed to freely speak on X and call out genocidaires, and call out Zionism for the grotesque ideology that it is? So here's hoping that cooler heads prevail on there. And just before we wrap up, it's been a long time since we've done this, but we usually end the program with the questionnaire that was done by the popular French by Marcel Proust, later the popular French broadcaster, the late Bernard Pivot, and later my hero, the late great James Lipton. So we'll start first with Janine. So here it goes. So Janine, what is your favorite word? And you're muted.
Wow. Okay, I haven't seen this before, so I really didn't know what you were going to ask. My favorite word. My favorite word. Okay. My favorite word of the moment, and yes, I'm going to take a political take on this, but it's something that, of course, we've all been working on and thinking about, is unity. I think it's a beautiful word. It's something we don't have enough of. It's something we have to fight for every day. So I'm going to go with that. My favorite word is unity.
What's your least favorite word then?
Oh, war? War, what we're fighting against every day. Short and simple.
All right, then what turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
You know what? I think sometimes we're so stuck in front of our computers. I work at this computer all day long. Then I turn around and work at this computer for, social justice and anti-war. Going outside, seeing, the magnolias are blooming outside on my street. Seeing the grass grow, remembering that this yeah, I know there's some ice storms hitting other parts of Canada. So, just having a moment to take a beat and see that we live in a very beautiful world that we're trying to protect.
And then what turns you off then?
Oh, noise, just, too much noise, too many 5-second reels on Instagram, and a little bit, that noise pollution if we're just kind of getting bombarded all the time.
Yeah. Then what's your favorite curse word? And seeing as we're and seeing as in Canada, if you have a French curse word, go right ahead.
Let's see. I don't know. So it just came to my head as you asked. a fond memory of my grandfather. My grandfather, my opa, on my mom's side is German. And whenever he was kind of annoyed about something, he'd mutter under his breath, "Dummkopf," which means dumb head. It's a simple curse word, but you know, it makes me feel like a little warm and fuzzy inside because I think of my grandfather saying that.
Well, it's funny. It's funny. I'm actually going to be visiting my sister in Berlin this weekend, so there's a chance I might be hearing that curse word. Then, what sound or noise do you love, followed by what sound or noise do you dislike?
Oh, this is really interesting because you really have to think, what's the first thing that comes to your head? So now I was thinking, you know, nostalgically about grandparents. So then the sound of the fan in the kitchen being turned off.
Okay.
And this is particularly related to, say, my grandmother making plates of pancakes and working in the kitchen and having this plate in front of me, and then suddenly you don't realize how loud it is until it's turned off, and then that's the sound of peace and quiet.
Then what sound or noise do you dislike then? Vancouver?
Do I dislike? Well, one of the things that we organize against is these air shows, and with fighter jets going around, basically promoting war as something fun and family friendly with these air shows and fighter jets, and you can hear them going out, making these horrific noises through the air, and especially you think of how many people are coming from war, countries that have been victims to these wars and occupations carried out by Canada and the United States. And then to hear that noise, I can just, I hear it myself, but I imagine someone hearing it when they've heard it going over them and dropping bombs. That's a horrific sound to hear.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Amen to that. And what profession, if you weren't doing the great journalism and activism and peace work that you do, so what profession, if you weren't doing yours, would you love to do? Followed by what profession would you absolutely not want to do under any circumstances?
So you can see maybe on the side over here, I have a nice little bouquet of flowers.
Yeah.
I just kind of think sometimes as I'm typing away at my computer, how nice it would just be to be in a florist shop putting together bouquets of flowers. So, that would be
nice.
In a perfect world. And what job would I hate to do? Oh,
yeah.
Let's see.
Working for the Masters of War.
Yeah, I mean that's maybe it's too obvious, but yeah, that would be it.
Then finally, if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say as you arrive at the pearly gates, or whatever is your vision of the afterlife? And even if you're an atheist, please do answer the question.
Oh, geez, these are some really tough questions. I can't say I've really thought of that, but it would be very nice if that was a place. Of course, we fight for and imagine a world of peace where people are not fighting each other, whether that be just walking down the street and having arguments and people frustrated at each other, or these horrific wars that we're fighting against. So I know I feel like the word peace is overused, but maybe in a perfect world, justice or peace, is the world that we're looking for, whether that be on earth or heaven.
Well, I'm pretty sure if you were to meet whatever whatever deity you may or may not believe in, or maybe you believe in multiple deities, but I believe the Beatitudes, it does say, "Blessed are the peacemakers." So, so Pierre, it's your turn to do it's your turn to do this. What is your favorite word?
Well, I'd say compromise.
Compromise, funny.
Because
many of us leftists don't like compromise, but
this is something that we must always work at, because it's tough. And I spent 14 years giving piano master classes in Czechoslovakia, what was Czechoslovakia first, and then came Václav Havel, who was a playwright and a fantastic man, and he was installed on the throne as the president of Czechoslovakia, and after 3 years, he had to let go Slovakia because they could not achieve a common ground. But it was achieved without a drop of blood. And I wish that Zelensky would have had the same fantastic quality and would have accepted that he would leave the Donbass region, the Russophone, the region where it's Russian being spoken, to be free.
Compromise, interesting. What's your least favorite word then?
Oh, I don't know. There are words that I never experienced myself, as like jealousy and or envy. I never was jealous of someone. I never was envious of anyone, and I think these are problematic sins that make a lot of words.
Well, it's funny. Even the word jealousy in French, which I think is jalousie. Yeah,
oui,
even
jalousie.
like you already, it already has like a very negative like connotation when you even say je jalouse quelqu'un, you know. So so interesting. Then what turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally, followed by what turns you off?
Humility, but that might be because I'm 76 years old. So this is a new quality that I must acquire and that I must fight to acquire every day. Humility is, I think, is a quality. Yeah.
Then what turns you off then?
Pretentiousness.
Fantastic.
Well, there's another word for that: Trump.
What is your favorite curse words?
Merde.
Good one.
The Cambron word.
One of the perks of living in Belgium is I get to hear that one in Poutine a lot. So, and what is your favorite curse words?
Oh, I just said it. No.
Oh yes. Oh yes. Then what sound or noise do you love? Followed by what sound or noise do you dislike?
Well, I live in the countryside, so when I wake up and I hear the birds singing, this is like there's a new day and a new hope for a day where less stupid sounds like politicians' words will aggress us.
Exactly. So would that be the sound or noise you dislike? Is the politicians, whether they're from Quebec or the rest of Canada?
Yeah.
All right. Then well, you say you're retired, but what profession, if you weren't doing being a music teacher, being a musician, being an artist for peace, what profession, if you weren't doing yours, would you love to do?
It's too hard for me to answer this question because at 4 years old, I asked my parents to have a piano, and this was my aim since I was 4 years old. And at 6, I was playing a Beethoven sonata on television. So I never had any other dream actually than playing.
Okay, well, what profession then would you absolutely not want to do under any circumstances then?
Well, maybe dentist.
Okay, no problem.
I wouldn't be good at it. That's what I mean. I respect dentists, of course.
All right, then, finalement, le dernière question. If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say as you arrive for the pearly gates, or whatever is your vision or belief in the afterlife? And even if you're an atheist, please please do answer.
Well, I would probably say, okay, I'm getting in, but please let these billion other people in before me, because they deserve to be in heaven after a life which was so hard for them, and my life was easy. And so that's probably what I would say, not out of out to make an impression that I'm being generous. No, just like so many people are having a hard life in Africa and South America, in Central America, in East Asia and Philippines and elsewhere. I mean,
Yeah.
if we could at least stop bombing them, that would be better for them.
Wow.
Yeah.
Talk about blessed are the merciful. So, so I'm afraid that's all we have time for. So, all right. So, well, first of all, thank you all for joining me. I just want to thank our I just want to thank our following guests once again: Ken Stone of the Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War, Pierre Jasmin of Artists for Peace, and Janine Solanki of Mobilization Against War and Occupation. Thank you all so much for taking the time to come on today. All my best in your efforts in advancing the peace movement, smashing the myths about Canada, speaking truth to the powerless and confronting the powerful, and all my best in your campaign to make imperialism a major topic in Canada's real role in the world and the cost of that role to folks. And good luck with the event and the solidarity work with Eve. And again, all my best. Good night and good luck. And yes, thank you all.
Our pleasure.
Thank you so very much. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.